Good day, everyone. My name is David Merrill. I'm a systems engineer with Polarian Software, and it's my pleasure today to talk to you a little bit about Polarian, particularly with respect to change management and impact analysis. We'll go ahead and get started. Just so you know also, this webinar is being recorded, and so you'll be able to play it back if you want to re-listen to it, or if perhaps some of your colleagues are not able to participate today. If you can hear my voice, then you've already joined the audio broadcast. You can only listen on your computer with speakers or headsets, but I'd like to encourage you to contribute on the question and answer or even the chat panel. I'm joined today by several colleagues from Polarian who are serving as panelists, and they will be able to respond to your questions as you ask them. And from time to time, I will pause and we'll take a look at some of those questions, and I'll address them as part of my webinar. So my hope is that we will be able to become as interactive as possible in this format. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Our agenda today is fairly simple. I'm going to begin explaining a little bit about the Polarian platform, an overview, if you will, to Polarian as a company and our approach to application lifecycle management and requirements management. Most of what I'll be talking about today is, in fact, a product demonstration, a live demonstration of the product within the context of dealing with change management issues and looking at the impact of those changes for future product development work and product work that's going on right now. At the end of the presentation, I'll stop and address your questions interactively. Sometimes the questions that have already been asked and answered earlier in the webinar, I'll bring back up again, and we can even segue and answer those questions in the context of the product as you would like. And then we'll finish with some next steps, things that you can do to take a closer look at Polarian. So first off, to sort of introduce the Polarian solution, if you visited Polarian.com, you may have seen this graphic before. We have three principal solutions in the Polarian family. One is Polarian Requirements, which is focused on eliciting, developing, and ultimately releasing products that have specific requirements. We have Polarian QA, which is a test management solution, which introduces some very specific enhancements to the area of manual and automated tests. And then all of these features are surrounded by Polarian ALM, or Application Lifecycle Management. And even though we talk about three different parts of the solution, these are really licensing levels. When you go to Polarian.com and download Polarian ALM, you'll be downloading everything that you need for Polarian Requirements or Polarian QA as well. This is a way for our customers to be able to economize their licenses that they purchase. Now, when I talk today about change management, I'd like to frame it in the context of entire project capabilities. So if you looked at our customer base, you would find customers from the aerospace industry. Today I know we're joined by some from universities, from manufacturing spaces for forklifts and industrial applications, as well as medical and pure software applications. Polarian is not bounded by any particular industry or even any particular methodology. If you observe a very formal waterfall V model method to development and releasing product, then Polarian can model that method and allow you to be compliant with the regulations that you need to have to meet. If, however, you're a software manufacturer and you are an agile development shop and stay very flexible and dynamic in both the type of development iterations that you work with and how much flexibility developers have to make and change designs on the fly, Polarian can reach out and allow us to either have just requirements or combine requirements with test management to track and manage all of the tasks associated with the work that's actually being done. So this entire circle of capability is possible within Polarian. And when I talk about change management, it's not merely going to be linked to a formal change request. We'll certainly talk about that today, but it's really about what's going on in this entire process while the work is being done for current development and while requirements are being elicited for future unplanned releases and future backlogs. To introduce the technical architecture of what I'm going to show you today, let me start at the top and work my way down. Polarion is first and foremost a Web 2.0 application, so you can drive it from just about any browser on just about any device. Today you'll be seeing it from Firefox on a Macintosh, but I could just as easily be presenting to you from a Windows device or even from a tablet or a handheld. There are some very specific plugins to other applications like Eclipse and Visual Studio. So if your developer is spending most of her or his time in Eclipse or Visual Studio, we can bring components of Polarion to that application so that they can work exclusively from there and still be able to link all of their work to the requirement or defect or task artifacts that are in Polarion. Even that they can record their time as they're coding when those final commits are made. We'll also see a little bit later how we plug directly into Microsoft Office and allow you to stay in touch with those stakeholders that are outside of your network enclave. We want them to be able to interact with the Polarion system as effectively as if they could log on to a browser within your own network. And then as we move to the right of the clients here, you can also see that we have extensions and what's called a live bus integration adapter. This allows you really as a customer to take Polarion beyond the current limitations of what the product is today. You can add your own extensions, and if you go to Polarion.com, you'll see that customers and partners of Polarion have built a rather robust ecosystem of forums and contributions to project templates and specialized applications within Polarion itself. And all of that's possible because our interfaces, the same interfaces that we would use internally to develop the product, are open and exposed to customers to use. And that includes a very powerful Java API, as well as publishing functions of Polarion through web services and SOAP to be able to more easily interact with Polarion data from the outside. Additionally, of course, we support some of the XML standards, so when you have test applications, you can bring them in very easily to Polarion using OpenXUnit or JUnit formatting capabilities. All of this is built on a Polarion web server, which has accesses to the data and the repository to serve up all of the compartmentalized blocks that we talked about earlier. And if you as a customer would like to add one of those blocks, it's very easily done within the Eclipse plugin architecture. Well, let's talk a little bit about what happens with change within your environment. And this will be the last slide before we finally get to the product. But I'd like to introduce sort of a dilemma, which is if you manage today product backlogs and system requirements and test specifications in Word or Excel documents, you're probably familiar with the idea that you have a file system with a lot of these documents. So let's take one, for example. Let's say, for example, that in a product backlog, I have 1,000 user stories. And those 1,000 user stories or high-level requirements lead to a document that has 500 system requirements. And each of those system requirements has a test case. So I'd have a test specification document that has 500 test cases in it. And in the process of executing these test cases, perhaps I'm going to create one or more defects, maybe 10 defects for each test case as I build this application. So you can see that it's a fairly simple breakdown of a more complex structure that you might have to deal with in your own environment. What happens when those defects now result in change requests? So now maybe a quarter of those defects are going to come back and lead to modified requirements. Then when the user stories are changing and the requirements are changing and the test cases are now changing, I have a much more complicated structure where I have to look at the impact of a change of one of these high-level user stories and how it might affect the requirement and how that subsequent change might affect the leading test case. And really also what's happening behind the scenes is that I don't just have one document, I have many of these. So let's take the example that I have 20 backlogs and 20 system requirement documents and 20 specification documents for all the products and services that I work with. Well, now the defects also spawn other work-related tasks. So in resolving a defect, I have a lot of items of work that I want to track. And so if I add up all of the artifacts and objects that are created as part of this fairly simplified view, you can see that instead of just 20 documents, I have over 100,000 different artifacts, and I have tens of thousands of changes that might be going on a daily or periodic basis. So if I track these in documents, I have a very, very difficult time keeping up with them. So without Polarian, you have hundreds of these documents, and tracing, making sure that they all link together, becomes a very large, time-consuming process. With Polarian, however, and something I'll be able to show you, we'll be able to maintain 60 definite document views and instantaneous traceability throughout the content of what's inside all of these documents. And that's my overall goal and what I'll be able to demonstrate to you today. So we're going to start by creating and managing some change requests. We're going to look at how changes will impact our demonstration project, and then we'll start linking change requests back to requirements as they go through their own approval process. All along, we'll be able to collaborate with the rest of our stakeholders, the rest of the Polarian users, and we'll look at things like suspect links when things change, being able to establish comments in traceable and auditable threads of communication within Polarian, eliminating the need for email or instant messaging as a primary way to communicate when we're talking about project-related work. And then ultimately, we'll look at all of this in the context of planning releases, both the release that we're working on right now and the future releases that are being planned in our environment. So with that, I'm going to put PowerPoint aside for now, and we're going to open up the Polarian graphical interface, which is, again, as I mentioned, in Firefox. And I'm actually going to expand the view so that we can see a little bit more of that on my small screen. But what you see here is the landing page, the home page for a particular project. In my case, this is an e-library project, which is meant to be an example of what you would expect to see in a library, to look up books, to find books you've checked out, to return books, and then maybe even to lead to working with electronic content eventually. So it's essentially a web portal application. I don't want you to think about this in terms of limitations of the only thing Polarian can do, but it's just an example for the ease of understanding in this webinar. We have many customers that have very complex projects that they have modeled that include mechanical designs and chip manufacture, circuit boards, and the firmware that controls all of that, as well as the overall software that might manage the entire product itself. So we'll take actually quite a small view of that. But every project, whether it's complicated or simple, will have a home page that you can customize to tell new users how they will interact with this particular project. Here we see that I have an area for requirements, I have an area for release planning, for risk management, development, and testing. So most of what we're going to do today is going to be bounded by this requirement specification and the release planning area. And we'll investigate more and more into the project as we go on. Secondly, one area that we can go to right away, particularly if we're looking to answer questions like where are we on this project, is the project dashboard. So here in my left-hand side, you can see the navigation pane, and I can move from the home page directly to a dashboard. And this dashboard is also entirely customizable to the customer and to the project, but it might give me information like what is my testing success ratios and how well am I covering specific items of code with automated tests. I can move through and see a live plan, which will show me how well I'm using my current resources. Do I have people wholly dedicated to this project, or do I have people only temporarily dedicated to the project? And I can look at various areas of operation throughout the lifetime of the project. And then finally, as you choose, you can include information about the quality of the planning. So if I am following an extreme programming method or CMMI, or if I have ISO or other regulatory obligations that I need to comply with as part of my project, this will give me a flash update on how well I'm complying with those standards during project execution. Okay, let me pause now and just check in and see if there's any questions. Okay, I don't see any questions yet. I really would like to encourage you to add questions as we go along. One question that does come up again is back to whether or not the performance is different or better on one particular web browser or another. So What I will say is that formally supported are browsers like Internet Explorer and Firefox across all their platforms. But I will also use Google Chrome and Safari on Macintosh and iPads, and I also use the native browsers built into the Android on tablets and mobile phones. Well, let's go a little bit deeper and take a look at the requirements specification area for a moment. So I'm going to click into that particular space, and now I'll have a home page where I can detail and see what is included in my specifications. You can see I have three types of specification documents right now: an administrative interface, business requirements, and user requirements. And in this home page, I can get basic information about how well I'm progressing from initial specification all the way through to ultimate verification and implementation. So this vBoard gives me a vModel-centric view of where my requirements happen to be. So I can see I have 5 business cases that are still in the specification area, and they really haven't been verified yet. And really, I don't expect those business cases to be verified until product is released. So I might be comfortable with that. You can see here in the user requirements that I'm moving nicely from having 2 user requirements, which are currently being refined, 12 in production and 11 that have already been verified. So I can mix and match all the information that I want to see, and every number that you see here is a hyperlink, so I can click on that number and move directly to a view that shows me what are those requirements. I can also click on the test coverage link here below to see which of these requirements have specific traceable and verified test cases that cover them. Over here on the right-hand side, let me slide a little bit over, you'll see the workflow. And the workflow is going to be a visual indicator to me of the process that each of these requirement artifacts will take throughout the life cycle of this specification area. You can see that it starts off with a draft, and it moves from draft to be reviewed, and from reviewed it can either be approved or rejected. And we'll deal with that a little bit more as the demonstration progresses. Well, one of the questions that comes up frequently is what happens when I have all these documents already and I need to get them into my system. So what I'm going to do for a moment, actually before I do that, let's take a look at what this user requirement specification looks like. And so I will open that view up in the hyperlink, and it will take me directly to a tab where now I have a document view. Now this is not looking at a Word document, but rather this is a Word-like view of all of the information that is already inside Polarian. I have headings, I have tables of contents like you would expect to see in a normal document, but as I move down throughout the document, you'll see that iconically some of the information changes. So anytime I see here a visual icon, that's a hint to me that I have a specific work item or artifact built into this document view. So EL105 happens to be the ID for the first requirement in this specification. And from here directly, I can begin to modify this requirement. So I can just click and begin to edit things like what would be some details of this requirement that would make sense. Perhaps I would add some bullet lists to say, all right, the user credentials should also come from Facebook or perhaps Google accounts so that I don't have to set up a new user every time I use the library. And perhaps I also want to be able to store a picture of what I'd like the mock-up of the user logon to look like. And so apart from actually entering in text, I can also put in any kind of information in terms of pictures. And I'll actually move to an area where I have waiting a graphic for that particular mock-up of the logon interface. And once it's here, I can resize it to make whatever sense within the document that I'd like to, and I can continue editing and refining this requirement. Now, every time I save this, it's keeping history of what David Merrill did to this particular requirement right now. And even though in this webinar only one person is editing this document view at the same time, know that multiple users could be accessing this view simultaneously, changing requirements and making edits to some of the text that you see here to refine and keep this document updated and live. In fact, we refer to this in many ways in Polarian as the live document, a live view into the data. And as necessary, if we want to move beyond this document-centric view, I can open up a much more detailed view of not just this one requirement, but actually look at all the requirements as seen inside this document. So everything you see here matches the document presentation that we just looked at, but now I can make more changes beyond simply adding titles and descriptions. You can see that I have a robust set of fields which allow me to set priority, to make assignments to individuals, to edit and modify how long it will take for this particular requirement to be refined. And up here, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but this becomes the traceability between this requirement and any upper level business requirements and any lower level subordinate artifacts. And what you see here is a test case and 2 other requirements and a change request linked to this particular requirement. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. So if I move down through here, and in addition to making an assignment, I would like to create some comments, then I could ask the question, so as a requirements manager or a business analyst manager, I might say, why isn't this requirement finished yet? I'm not putting this in an email or instant message, because when I create this comment, I'd like to make sure that it becomes a permanent part of the auditable history of this artifact. So I will always know who did something, when did they do it, and what they did. We'll come back to that in other areas later on. Well, that's a very high-level view of the document view, and then taking a look at what we call a work item, a very detailed engineering level view of the metadata. Now, the metadata can be expanded by you as the customer, so you can have as much or as little information exposed to the user interface that you want. In fact, I can just click a button right here and filter out some of the more technical data, so I see a better synopsis that might be a better view for someone who's occasionally looking at some of these values. Okay, well, let's go back to the specification space for a moment, because we started this conversation out with the idea of importing a document. So I'm going to start now by importing an existing Word document. And before I do that, let's take a look at what that Word document looks like. So here's a copy of Microsoft Word, and you can see that this document has a header and has some titles. This is actually what you might expect to see coming out of a user group meeting. So this is going to be a document full of what I think to be feature requests or change requests. And so we'll get a feel for that, the look and feel of this document. And we'll see what happens in Polarian when we import that. And so to do that, I come back to my user interface, my graphical interface, and I'll click on the import button, and that's going to allow me to find the file. And so I have it here in this handy location. And when I open it, I have the choice to pull from a specific rule set. So I'm going to choose a feature and change request import. And that's going to help me build and refine the rules for importing this document that are different from importing a requirements doc or a test specification. So let's move this out a little bit. What you're seeing now is a little bit like the document view here on the left-hand side, but on the right-hand side we have a new pane in the workspace that is the rule for importing this document. I'm going to take just a moment and check back with QA and see if any questions have come up. Okay, no questions yet, so I'm going to encourage you to ask questions. I'll stop from time to time and answer those questions in the particular views if you have them. Okay, well, what this rule tells me is that Polarian is going to read the document and mark paragraphs as a change request artifact if the paragraph contains the words must, should, or want. Now, as I move through the preview on the left-hand side, we will see that the first one, users must be able to create patron or student logon accounts. That has been tagged as being a potential change request, and instead of a permanent ID, you can see it's marked with a temporary ID because I haven't really imported this or committed this document to Polarian yet. But I can review it and see what the results are of those rules. And I can change the rules too. So for example, if we look here under Catalog Quick Search, you can see that there's 2 bullet items that are not specifically listed as requirements. Now that might be something that should be a sub-requirement. And so I have the ability also to create, based on a series of different criteria, what should be listed as a requirement. So in this case, I'm going to say anything with a list item, anything like a bullet list or a numbered list, should also be tagged as a requirement. And so with that new set of criteria, I can move through, reformat the document with the new rule set, and see, in fact, that I have built a nested relationship of subordinate change requests. Now, perhaps that's not quite what I'd like to do, so I can simply remove that and try again. And I can also add some new advanced options to say, well, if I happen to have a list item, what I'd really like to do is include that in the previous artifact. So I'll change this a little bit and preview again. And now we'll see that instead of being separate requirements, these bullet points are now included within the parent change request as a whole. And that's actually what I'd like to have. So now if I feel like I'm ready to import these values, I can click this import button in the lower right-hand side. And what you can do is combine more and more complicated information here, or maybe it's a very simple import, to be able to match what you want to deconstruct from your document. The document does not have to fit a particular style. And we're really using natural language and general formatting capabilities to be able to gather the necessary information that we would like to have. It's not the end of the formatting of the document, it's really just the initial part or the beginning of it. So I'll go ahead and click the import button. And instead of importing requirements, I'm importing change requests. It doesn't mean that these change requests are necessarily approved. In fact, it might be something which is first reviewed by a business analyst. And the business analyst might take a look at this document coming from a user group meeting and make all sorts of changes or findings to it. So for example, I might find, well, this particular change request isn't valid. I really don't want to have to deal with it. So I can open up a sidebar here, which gives me a view to some of the more detailed attributes of this work item. And one of the things that I could do is immediately reject it. And when I reject it, I could potentially have some custom fields to say, all right, this is an invalid request coming from a user. So I'm going to set those values and click OK. And OK, I'm missing a particular required field, which is where and when is this going to be decided on? Well, it's decided on in this version 1. And so let's go through and now save that. So now I've essentially taken that requirement and acted on it. It is now rejected. If I want to further refine things and even delete change requests, I can click on any particular one, say this 216, and instead of just simply deleting it, I can say, well, I don't want to keep that as a formal change request right now, but I'd like to keep it as unstructured text within the document, and now save this. So as a business analyst, I can go through and make my refinements to this initial document. Well, if this came from a user steering committee, from a group steering committee, they might want to see the results of some of this. So for example, let's actually do one other thing. Back to this idea of a user login, logout. One of the things that might have happened here in this particular user group is they did some whiteboard drawing. So again, what I'll do is I'll include an image that might have come from the user group meeting as suggestions for how the product should be developed. And so these are further types of additions that can be made to the attributes of the change request itself as part of the refinement process. Now, once I have developed these kinds of refinements, I'd like to get this back to the steering committee that first sent me that document. And I don't have to grant them access to Polarion itself, but what I want to be able to do is send this back into a Word format similar to how they sent me. But I'd like to do it in a way that allows them to make comments. So I'm going to choose something in Polarion called Word Round Trip to export this document. Now, because I'm sending it to a user group, I probably will only enable them to make comments to the document. If it was a more trusted group, perhaps of direct stakeholders or contributors to the project, then I could choose collaboration mode, and that would allow them to actually make changes to the document itself, make additions to titles and descriptions, and really become ongoing editors of this change request specification. But I'll pick review here, and we'll generate that. Now, that document is going to be downloadable now on my workstation, and then I can in turn open that document up and make changes, or I could email this out or post it on a web server where the steering committee could have direct access to it. What I'm going to do now is go back to Microsoft Word, and instead of looking at the original document now, we're going to open up the modified document that came from Polarian Round Trip. And in doing that, you'll notice right away that it has the same look and feel as the original document. The header is the same, the title and description all look the same, but as I move down through the document, it contains all of the changes that we've made already to each of the artifacts. And so you can see the artifact ID, the change request artifact ID, the severity fields, as well as any of the modified content. And since I've exported this in a rather limited mode, the only thing this particular stakeholder can do is use Microsoft Word review capability to insert comments like, this is a must-have feature for most users. Now, that might seem to be a very trivial comment, but this is exactly the type of feedback I'm looking from the steering committee to be able to make direct contributions on some of the values set here for new feature planning. Another one might be a greater highlight of either not just text outside of a requirement, but inside here I can actually highlight specific text in the requirement and make comment only to that section of text. Verification process must be adapted to youth as well. And so I would continue to move through the document to make these necessary changes or comments. And if I had exported it with the collaboration rights, I could actually come in and change information and make additions to the description and the text, which is unstructured outside of the change request artifacts. So let me save this document back to its original location, and I'm going to return now to the Polarian user interface to complete the other side. So the other side of what we just did is importing the changes. So still in the document view, I'm going to import the changes that were just brought in or just made by my user group stakeholder, and I'll open that directly. Now, I could choose to override any particular conflicts or just to import comments, but since I know that this particular document was only open for comments, then I'll be able to take a look at that after the changes. Now, one of the things that we want to do is, instead of viewing the whole document, we don't really know what was added yet. Let's take a look at the new comments. So here we see the comments that were entered in, and they're hyperlinked together. So I can click on the comment, and it will move me directly to the area where the comment was entered in. And so I'll see immediately what the contributions were, and I can reply to these comments. And subsequent Word round trip events will be able to pass these comments back to the user. Now I can save that entire dialogue as part of both the document view and what the stakeholder will ultimately see as well. Okay, let's go back now to the specification space for a moment, because what we've built is a combination area of both requirements and user specifications. So if I move over and take a look at another tab, it's also important to note that during this whole process, assignments are being made, and when users check in with Polarian, one of the things that we want to be able to see is, what do I have to do today? And so this is the My Polarian page. And on My Polarian page, I have a breakdown of all of my tasks and defects that have been assigned to me, as well as any items that are awaiting my approval. So under awaiting my approval, you can see that I have a requirement, a business case, and also a change request that's waiting for my approval. And I also see something in this area here, which is, how do I deal with the change impact? So something's going on where a test case has been marked as suspect and is going to lead me to make some sort of evaluation and examination of that test case to see how that test case is affected by the change. And so this is a common location for people to begin their day with and to check in periodically. Also, to the point that if I want to make comments to any of the activities that have happened lately, so for example, here's a particular piece of a created change request, I can add comments here, and that will go into the work item. Hold on just a moment. I have lost connection with the webinar. Please hold on just a moment. I'm going to try to reestablish connection in just one moment. Everybody, this is David Merrill back. See, I'm in a hotel, and the hotel connection is being quite problematic. Again, I'm going to continue to try to connect. If I have any additional difficulty, I'm going to try routing through my phone, and I'll do my best to get connected as soon as possible.